Good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, how you doing?
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm doing well. Yourself?
Good. And yeah, I'm just seeing. Okay, great. We've got some participants here, just making sure.
Okay, okay.
All right. Well, I think we could go ahead and get started. Um, Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Ashley Hauser with Big Apple Film Festival.
Nice
Um,
to meet you, Ashley.
Nice to meet you too. We're now kicking off our Screenwriters Conference for today. And then
Very
for
cool.
everyone here, we also have the Big Apple Film Festival happening in New York City. We're going to be having screenings all week at the Quad Cinema. Um, and yeah, so kind of how this Screenwriters Conference works is I'll kick us off with some background questions. And
Sure,
then
sure.
for anyone here in the chat, if you guys would like to drop in questions in the chat box, we'll be reading them and kind of just have a great conversation. Um,
Right on.
yeah, great. So I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, your background, how you got into the industry.
Okay, okay. Well, I grew up in South Dakota and Minnesota, mostly out in farm country, and lived on a farm and worked on farms and all that kind of stuff, and was a voracious reader, and got tons of boxes of books from auctions and stuff when farms were going bankrupt in the '80s and nobody wanted books, so it was easy. You could get a giant box of comics or something for like $1. And I always wanted to be a writer. Even when I was young, I wanted to be a writer, so I was writing little stories and stuff. Mostly ripping off like comic book stories when I start. And anybody, when they start, you're going to try to emulate the people that you like. But I couldn't draw to save my life. I thought I was going to be like a comic book writer and illustrator, but I can't draw to save my life. So that one didn't work out. But so I kept writing and went to school for creative writing at Mankato State in Minnesota, and dropped out before I graduated. Went to USC for a while, and then I dropped out of there and got a job as a reader at an agency for one of my professors, doing coverage on scripts, which anybody who wants to be a screenwriter, I would really recommend doing that job because, man, you're going to learn a lot. And you read a ton of stuff, and you get to see how the inside of an agency works as well. Although there's readers at production companies and for studios and that kind of a thing as well. But so did that for a while, and while working other odd jobs, bouncing at a bar and working construction and all kinds of stuff. And then one day, one of the guys who lived in my apartment building in Los Angeles, who was an assistant at Gersh, which is a lit agency, asked me what I was working on, if I had any good scripts or whatever. And I said, well, give it a shot. And he liked it. And he passed me on there. And no, by the way, I'm glazing over like 10 years of suffering.
Nice.
Right. I'm just skipping to that part. And brought me in, and I got rep there, and started getting some gigs here and there. But really, probably, the two things really helped my career really kick off. One was I had my first manager, a guy named Josh Schechter, who was amazing, who I'm not with anymore just because he's not in management anymore. At Anonymous Content right now with Ryan Cunningham, who's been my manager for a long, long time, and he's amazing. But bringing him on, and then I got a writing gig, and one day he just had an act of desperation. I emailed like every single person I knew, especially people who had read my stuff, and I was like, man, if you got anything, like I'll write on the back of a cereal box, anything. And a friend of mine was running a reality show, and asked if I wanted a job in that writer's room, and I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, sure. And that was my first like legit like paid. I mean, I'd had lots of paid writing gigs before then, but like real money writing gig. And went from there to did my first feature over at New Line, and then MGM, then Universal, then Paramount, and then started getting into the TV biz. 3 different shows I worked on Netflix right now: Black Summer, Arcane, and Jupiter's Legacy. Arcane's the most recent of those. Black Summer is my favorite. But yeah, I'm working on a bunch of TV and features now, just living that writer life and enjoying it.
Fantastic. That was such a great overview. Really appreciate that. Yeah, and I thought, let's see, I think folks are still kind of arriving. I could kind of
Sure,
just
sure.
going through a couple questions, unless if
Yeah,
our audience wants to drop some in our Q&A box, which will be located just on the bottom part of the Zoom. But I guess kind of going back to the start of your writing career, which I guess, you could argue it was when you were really young. But what would you say has been the most surprising thing about your job? Was there something when you went into it like, oh, I didn't think that would be part of it?
I mean, it doesn't surprise me anymore. It surprised me at the time, especially in the realm of screenwriting, which is how much work you have to do to get work. Even when you're in you're in the business, you're an established writer. At any 95% of your job is pitching, right? And 5% of it is writing, So you're spending so much time coming up with takes for open writing assignments, and so on and so forth, like all the time, or coming up with your own stuff and whatever, like the amount of work required. And it's kind of gone beyond that now, where it's not just coming up with an awesome pitch. It's like you got to have an awesome pitch, and the director attached, and half the financing, and the actor attached, and whatever, like before you walk in the door at a lot of places now. But that's it's you always think it's going to be like you get your first gig and then it's just going to be a gravy train. It is not. It's not the old gravy train with biscuit wheels.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always, just one other thing, or so much more.
But even when there's a good friend of mine who was nominated for an Oscar not too long ago, and he was thinking, he's like, man, like I'm an Oscar nominated writer now, like things are going to get easier. But all that happened was now he's up for jobs with Oscar winning writers, right? So he's like, it's the same thing, just like a different level.
Mhm.
You still got to do the work. And even people who are incredibly successful and well known, they're doing the same thing, believe it or not.
Yeah, it's all relative. You let's see, you brought up a really good point too when talking about that, with the you said pitching is 95% of the job. I was wondering if you could speak to maybe your early pitching experiences
Oh,
versus
sure.
where you are now, and about that process.
Right. Well, so my struggle with pitching has not been like, I'm not afraid to get in front of people. I don't have that kind of public speaking anxiety, which I think came from a lot of customer service jobs when I was young. But the struggle for me is always trying to balance storytelling with salesmanship, right? Because what you're there to do is sell something, but what you're selling is a story, right? And you've got to try to balance those things, and it really depends on your audience and who you're pitching to. If it's somebody that I know well, then I know exactly what I need to do and how I need to formulate that pitch for that person. If you're going out with a pitch where you're going to hit a whole bunch of places with a bunch of people you've never met before that are new faces, you've got to kind of attenuate that to the best balance of that salesmanship and storytelling, right? Now, you could argue they're one of the same, salesmanship and storytelling, but I don't know, that's the struggle for me. My advice to anybody who's never pitched, especially like if you have some kind of like public speaking or social anxiety around it, is rehearse it. Find a mirror in your house where you can work uninterrupted, like go to the bathroom and shut the door and pitch yourself in the mirror. Because one thing is like you can see how your face looks, right? You can see if you look like anxious and whatever. And it's not pleasant to listen to pitches, from people that are like so nervous, because you feel bad for them. You're like, oh man, but practice, rehearse, write it down, write it like you're writing a speech for a character, which is essentially what it is. It's a one-man show for 12 minutes, and be compelling. And if there's when I fail in the realm of pitching, It's when I go like pure story without any salesmanship, I would lose the razzle dazzle. Um, but yeah, it's a process. You can always get better. You can always get better. Um, and when you watch, uh, if you're ever wonder why like there's some writers who every movie that they of theirs that comes out is awful and they just keep getting hired, it's because they're good in a room. It's because they're incredible salesmen, and he or she could go in there and just pitch the bejesus out of everybody in there. That's why, and they just keep going. So that's the power of salesmanship is a real thing, and you need to have it as a writer.
That's such a great tip and lesson, I think, too, because just there's so much storytelling in business, and they really kind of go side by side. Also, I really appreciated what you said about rehearsing and getting comfortable with that. That's such a great getting in front of your mirror, recording yourself.
Oh, for sure. Actors do it all the time. Because that's it's a
Yeah,
performance, right?
exactly.
You should be doing. Join. I don't know if I would assume this organization is still around, but there used to be an organization called Toastmasters. That was just all about public speaking. I think they're still around. I don't know, but like that's
I
a
think
good
they
thing.
are.
And I
Yeah.
don't even know if it costs anything, or if it does, it's not much.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's probably not much, or it might be volunteer based even.
Yeah, it might be. Might be. I don't know.
Yeah, that's another good suggestion. Um, which kind of brings me into another question that I was just thinking of as we were talking is so I was wondering if you had any other suggestions for other skills that you'd recommend to other writers out there to, add to their toolbox, like,
Yes,
business.
I
Yeah, maybe
do.
speak to that a little
Um,
bit.
Learn how to use, either Microsoft PowerPoint or what's the Adobe one? Um,
Oh,
it's not Premiere, that's the editing software. Whatever it is, there's the
yeah, an
Adobe
Adobe version.
like presentation software. Learn how to use Photoshop and stuff, because in this age of Zoom, where 90% of your meeting is going to be on Zoom, the bonus is you don't have to live in LA to do it. Although I would recommend anybody going to Los Angeles, at least for a couple of years, just to get out and meet people. There's no substitute for like breaking bread in person and having some cocktails and whatever else. But in this age of Zoom, so much is done online, and you've got to put together a pitch deck that's like a visual presentation, while you're doing the oral pitch, right? And you're like scrolling through these images and whatever kind of, the more compelling that can be, because it's different than being in a room. When you're in a room, you can really engage people. It's the difference between live theater and watching a movie. To keep people entertained in a film, you need a lot more going on the screen, right? Because it's not as interactive, and you can't read people. But in theater, you can put one person on a stage. I saw an incredible one-man show called this is my favorite one-man show I've ever seen, called The Gambler's Guide to Dying. Maurice Sterling was the actor doing it, and he did, I don't know, like 30 different characters in this thing, with Scottish accents, Irish accents, English accents, American accents, German, like you name it, just across the board. And it was just like the most incredibly compelling thing. This guy on a bare stage, for an hour and a half, and was just wildly compelling. But that's in person. I think if you watched it, it's not going to be the same. The energy's not the same. But so you're on, when you got to do this stuff on Zoom, you've got to be able to put together decks. If you don't have access to PowerPoint or to the Adobe suite of stuff, there's another program that, I've used it a ton, especially if I got to do something like real quick, where I just need images and I don't need fades and, whatever. But Comic Life 3, there's a program called Comic Life 3 that's like $30. And you can make awesome decks on that. It doesn't do like everything that you would want it's for making comic books, right? So it doesn't do everything that the Adobe stuff does, or the PowerPoint does, or whatever, but you can absolutely make a deck on there. So if cost is an issue, $30 out the door, and it's not a subscription, it's $30, and you own that thing for life.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I think I do remember Comic Life from a while ago using that. It was a really cool program. Yeah, and then I guess too with speaking to pitches or sorry, deck, your pitch deck.
Yes.
What would you say from personal experience, kind of in a nutshell, what do you think is the key takeaway from, having a really good presentable deck?
What you want out of that deck is for it to emphasize the dramatic and emotional moments in your pitch, or if you're doing a comedy, the comedic moments, but also your emotional moments in there. It's what you don't want to do is be like, hey, here's a picture of, Brad Pitt, because that's who I want the character to be, and here are comps for who the actors could be and all that stuff. But you can have that at the end or whatever if you want. But what you really want is dramatic and compelling presentation. And you want to time those images so that sometimes the image is the reveal, and sometimes the spoken element is the reveal. But really, again, storytelling and salesmanship. That's what you're trying to do, and that's something that, like, I mean, nobody ever said anything to me, at least, about that when I was getting into this business or pursuing this career. That it's a sales job. And also a writing job. And since you got to write your sales pitches, I guess it's all writing, but it's a sales job. Essentially that's what you've got to do, is you got to be a great salesman, and then you got to be able to back up the product that you're selling, which is your writing services.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, always selling. Oh, that's great. And I kind of I see that there's a couple more participants now, and welcome. And just wanted to say to our audience, if you have any questions at all that you'd like us to talk about, go ahead and drop them in the chat. I'll be sure to read that. And I guess kind of moving on, I would say, is there a particular project for you that you're most proud of, and why?
Yeah, but I can't talk about it because it's not out yet.
Oh, okay.
uh
No worries.
of stuff that's out. Black Summer, I worked on season 2 of Black Summer, and it's such an underappreciated show. It's a zombie apocalypse show, but it's the best zombie apocalypse show I think anybody's ever done. It's John Hyams, who ran that show, is just incredibly smart, with great gut instincts about everything. And I was brought in to work on that, and had a great time working with him. Had an incredible amount of creative freedom on my episode. And if you have not watched that show, watch it. If you don't like being scared, don't watch it. But it's a different kind of storytelling than you've seen on any other shows. There's a lot of choices that John made as a showrunner on there that were incredibly effective in terms of making a kind of a horror zombie show, and keeping it compelling in a way that we haven't seen before. And there's a storytelling ethic that I'd never encountered working for anybody else, where like he said, he's like, here's the rules of our storytelling. Here's the things we do. Here's the things that we don't do. And I loved it. It was just great. And go watch that show.
Oh, I'm excited. Oh, and I see we've got a question from Jim Worst. Thank you so much, Jim. Jim writes, I'm in New York City. Everyone agrees with what you've said about spending time in LA to meet/network. I'm not repped. I know no one in Los Angeles. Cold calls are frowned upon. How do you start?
Jim, this is a question I hear a lot. I was just at the Austin Film Festival, and this is like, this or some derivation of it are very frequently asked, right? So here's the thing, right? So like, Jim, I assume that you could probably respond on this chat here too, which is like, my question is, are you willing to move to Los Angeles, or is the thing is you're staying in New York, and you're just going to try to do it from there? And I assume he can respond back to that if you can. If not, but well, I'll chat whilst
I think,
that.
yeah, I think you could still drop more things in the chat.
We'll see.
Even if it's a question, it could be a response if we want to do that.
Got it. Well, here, hold on. Well, I'm gonna. Oh, there you go.
Oh,
I'm
great.
on. There we go. I can visit LA, but I can't move there. Okay. Gotcha. So it's a little different. Like, it used to be you had to go there. There was no way around it, right? Now in the post-coronaverse, I think you can not live in Los Angeles. If you've got, like, if you've already established a career, right? Because everything's on Zoom. But if you've never been there, like, how do you start without going there? Like, visiting is one thing, whatever. So my answer to this is multiple angles here. So the first thing is have a superb writing sample, right? If you have an absolutely exquisite script, and it gets around, and I've got a great story about this actually. This part of my answer is that nothing breaks down doors for you like excellent material. There was a gentleman who was an assistant to a couple of managers that I knew, and I met him at the Austin Film Festival. The managers and I were going out for dinner. They said, "Hey, you mind if we bring our assistant?" I said, "No, of course not, man. Bring him along." And great young guy, and chatted it up. And at some point, I asked him, I said, "Oh, what do you want to do? Are you going to be a manager or whatever?" And he's like, "No, want to be a writer." And I said, "Hey, when you have something, that you think's ready to go, happy to take a look at it for you." And about 6 months later, he sent me a script, and I opened it up while I was making dinner for my kids, and to see if I was going to read it, and generally, if something's not good, I'll read about 10 pages, and then I'll just tell the person, like, here's some things you could apply to the rest of the script. But I started reading it while I was making dinner, and I kept reading it while I was eating dinner, and then I finished reading it after dinner, and it was, one of the best scripts I had ever read from anybody. And I called him up and told him that I loved the script, and asked him if he was repped anywhere, and he was not, and was just incredibly gracious and thankful. And I said, "Hey, listen, I'd love to send this out to some people for you," which is the first time in 20 years I've ever done that. That I read a piece of material that I thought was so good that it was like, all right, like, I'm not a manager, I'm not an agent, but I'm going to send it to the people I know. I got to try to get this guy going. So it went out to CAA, ICM, WME, UTA, and a bunch of management companies, and everybody wanted him because the script was that good. Everybody wanted to sign this writer, and I think he ended up at UTA. He's got a script that Bryan Cranston is starring in, and he just finished shooting on one that he wrote with Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, right? And that was 3 years ago, I think, that he sent that script over. So the easiest, shortest route is to be an incredibly good writer and write that material. And to frame this, I think he had written like 15 scripts before that one. But then the other thing that's important is, like, well, he got in and he delivered, right? He's just been getting gig after gig after gig because he delivers. Because not only is he handling the writing aspect of it, he's handling the interpersonal business aspect of it well. And there's usually like three things that reps are looking for: is like, is the material good? Are you good in a room? And who do you know? Right? Do you know people in the industry? Like, have you already been networking and that kind of thing? So, so that's important. So Jim Worst, first thing, like, have excellent material. Second thing, just as a door opener, if you're not in Los Angeles, man, and start entering some screenwriting competitions. Hit all the big ones: Nichols, Austin, et cetera. Like, they'll get you some prize money. They're not going to do an incredible amount for you career-wise. However, it will open a door to a submission for you, right? Hey, I'm Jim Worst. I won the Nichols Fellowship, right? Like, they'll read your script. They'll take a look at it. Also, because here's the thing: how it happens in Los Angeles when you live there is you just naturally meet people. You're out drinking or whatever, and I mean, 90% of my contacts are people that I met drinking in my 20s in Los Angeles that are now, like, running things. But also, yeah, there you go, Jim. Like, you're you're already doing that stuff. I don't know whether like query letters work. I don't deal with them, so I don't know. I'm not a rep. I don't, I think you got to find somebody probably younger and new, but then they're hungry at least, you know? But I guess the other thing is that there's just so much internet stuff that like I'm not savvy to. There's got to be like writing groups that are like bi-coastal, right? That are cross-pollinating, where you can like meet people there and so on and so forth. But there's film business in New York as well, not as prevalent as it is in Los Angeles. But I don't, everybody gets in differently. And the long and short, Jim, is hustle and write really good stuff. I see we've got a question from Rob from the UK. What would your advice be to somebody who gets the occasional writer's block? How do you break through that block? Okay. So here's my controversial opinion on writer's block, is that it doesn't exist. I sometimes wonder what people are referring to when they say writer's block, because if it's that like the ideas aren't coming or something, then dude, sit down and type, sit down and work, sit down and write. I have so many things in my head at any given point in time that like my struggle is like, which one am I going to do? Right. And like most of my original stuff, I don't get to do because I'm just busy working for other people, doing some version or derivation of their idea. But the answer to most cases of air quotes writer's block, and I'm not bagging on you here, Rob, is discipline, is the answer to that question, where you sit down every day and you put in the time doing the work. There's a part of writing that only happens when you're not typing, and there's a part of writing that only happens when you are typing, right? When you're burned out on the typing part and you're getting stuck, step away, whatever, have a cup of coffee, grab a smoke if you smoke, take a shower, get a meal, whatever, but actively think about the story. Like that's one of my favorite like story breaking mechanisms, is in the car. I'll have music on. I always have music on when I'm writing or in the background. But I'll actively think about it. Right. I'm not thinking about, getting groceries or, whatever else it is I got to do for the rest of the day. I'm like, all right, I'm just like turning this problem in your head. And you do it enough and like your brain gets used to the mechanism and it's like, oh, we're doing this now. Okay, I'll do that. But on the writing side, that discipline is, everybody has a different way, like professionals that I know of, like how they get their work done every day, because you got to get it done, right? What I do is I have a stopwatch, and I usually sit down and write for 3-hour chunks. But so I sit down and like I start the stopwatch, and like while I'm like actively working, typing, the stopwatch runs. If I stop to check an email, the stopwatch stops. I stop to use the restroom, the stopwatch stops. Getting my coffee, the stopwatch stops, right? But I got to get that 3 hours, right? So what you find, like the first time you try to do that, is it's going to take you like 7 hours to write for 3 hours, and you realize how much time you're wasting, right? And how much slacking you're doing. And the more work you get, the more regimented your schedule needs to be, where it's like, this is like, I got to write during this time that the words need to get done. And then it gets, it takes you 3 hours and 15 minutes to do it, right? And sometimes it just takes 3 hours, like you're just on a roll. But so I'll write for 3 hours, I'll get a bite to eat, maybe watch like an episode of something that's like 15 minutes long, which is usually like, I don't know, like, a Rick and Morty or Amazing World of Gumball or Y-Files on YouTube. If you don't know that show, it's just all kinds of like wacky conspiracy theory stuff and alien stuff. It's super fun, but the great production. That's like 15 minutes long. And then I'll sit down with the stopwatch for another 3 hours, and do that. See, and that's the whole, like some people do it by pages. They're like, oh, I'm going to write 5 pages today. Right. But for me, like 5 pages might take me 15 minutes, or it might take me 9 hours, like depending what I'm doing. So I just do it by the time. If I was productive in the time, that's what I stick on. Hopefully that's helpful, Rob.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, that I think too, you honed in on kind of the importance of like taking breaks and then coming back to it as
Yeah,
well.
it definitely helps. Oh, well, I'm glad it was helpful, Rob. I like this little Q&A thing, so you can actually like
This is
see.
really nice to be able to see everybody respond to it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah. And yeah, for our audience, you guys are doing a great job utilizing the chat. Keep at it. Um, yeah, and I guess too, kind of tagging on to that, I know we've talked about having other elements, other good tools in your toolbox, such as, being business savvy, the, customer service skills and, for
Hmm.
for your pitch. I'm wondering if you have any other suggestions for writers to add to their toolbox. Is there, other sort of extracurricular things to
Well,
spend their time on that would help?
here's so one is when you start getting work, read your contracts. Read your contracts and um, ask your attorney what things mean, because a lot of times it may not mean what you think it means, and or it may mean exactly what you think it means, and you're like, well, I'm not going to do that. You know, um, the more you, if you read your deals every time they come through, and you read those contracts like every time they come, um, it's really going to help you. It's gonna inform you, in a very important way, um, going forward. But as far as other skills, I guess specifically related to writing, is anything to do with filmmaking, where the best thing you could possibly do for your career is figure out a way to skip the line, right? And not do it the stupid way that I did it, where if you can say, you know, make an indie feature that's well done, right, and rock solid, like, you can skip the line. You'll get reps, right? You'll get up for some gigs, maybe like get yourself some commercial work, which is like awesome paying stuff, 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there, and you're making a grip of money. And you're getting experience with all kinds of different ways of directing, shooting, that kind of stuff. But like, learn how to direct, learn how to edit, which is also going to help you, like making little reels and decks and whatever else. If you can draw, that's a great skill. But anything to do with filmmaking is going to help you and educate you. Even teach yourself how to do budgets, teach yourself how to break down a script, and budget and board. The more things that you can do yourself, the fewer people you're going to be reliant on to move your career and to move your stories forward. And then also, just any hobbies are good for writers, man. Anything where you have specialized knowledge, you would be shocked how often things come up that, like, whatever, if it was from some crappy job you had, as a teenager, that suddenly that specialized knowledge like comes into play, especially in writers' rooms on TV shows where you have all kinds of different characters and a lot of conversations about all the story elements and things that are going on. You'd be surprised what comes up. So anything to do with filmmaking, you should learn. Anything to do with art, music, editing, all that stuff is going to help you and provide you with ways to. The best thing that you can do is figure out how to make your own material, right? But if you can't do it exquisitely, don't do it, right? Meaning, don't write $100 million movie and try to shoot it for $30,000. Write a $30,000 movie, and do it exquisitely, right? It's like the years ago, was at a little Italian place in LA, and the chef, we were sitting, there's nowhere else to sit, so we were kind of sitting at this counter, and the chef came out. We struck up a conversation, and he's says he's going to kind of like cater our meal experience, and it was second or third dish was something with a marinara on it, and it was the best marinara, to this day is the best marinara sauce I've ever tasted in my life. And I asked the guy, I says, oh my gosh, what's the secret? What did you do? What's in this? And he's like, tomatoes, garlic, olive oil, and salt. Right. And he's like, they're the best tomatoes that I could find. Right. It's the freshest garlic. I grow it myself. I've painstakingly, lovingly prepared this, right? Like just anybody could go to the grocery store and get this stuff. And if you had this guy's patience, right, and his palate, you can make that sauce. But like, that's the thing. It wasn't a bunch of expensive ingredients. It wasn't some insane process. It was just time and effort and working with the tools. So like, use the tools that you've got to work with. And that's where, now the other thing too, is like, if anybody who does decide to go to Los Angeles, or even if you're in another city, if you've got like editorial skills, like you can, use Premiere and what's the other one that everybody used to use? Not Final Cut Pro. That was there for a second.
That's
but
what I was thinking of.
no, the main one. Somebody chime in. I can't believe I'm spacing on this.
Yeah, me too.
It's been like the biggest editing software like forever. Avid. Yes.
Thank you.
But if you could use Avid and Premiere, and you need to be able to use Avid and Premiere. If you can't use Premiere nowadays, like I feel like you're just hosed. DaVinci also has editing software that's like starting to actually come around now. They were formerly just like color timing stuff, but their editorial software is not bad at all. And you can go back and forth with theirs, where it's kind of like a pain to try to go backwards into Premiere. From DaVinci back into Premiere is kind of a pain, but like DaVinci, like its own thing. But so in any case, like that's all really useful stuff. Like you can get in Edit Bay, and then you're working with directors and you're working with producers, even if it's on commercial stuff, right? Those people know people that know people, right? And also a lot of big directors come into commercials, especially, expensive, because like some of these commercials, it's $3 million for 30 seconds of footage, once it's all cut together. But hopefully that answers that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
What are the rest of our Slacker participants doing? Give us some questions, guys.
Early, guys. I guess early for me. I'm out in the Bay Area. Another thing too, that I'm just curious about, and reading more about you. I was reading. You've given a TED Talk.
I did indeed.
Yeah. Can you? I'm just curious about that process.
And the process.
What encouraged you to do that?
The people running the TED Talk contacted me, and it was a talk on imagination and creativity and that kind of a thing, and in Bogota, Colombia, and which is a beautiful but very large city, with a ton of really, really good food. I mean, just incredible food design. But in any case, so they contacted me and asked me if I had something that I wanted to talk about in that realm, and I didn't figure I'd be getting asked to do a TED Talk for a while yet, or ever again. So I was like, man, I better take advantage of it. As I said, oh yeah, sure, I got something, and then scrambled frantically to get something together, because I had a call with them like 3 days later. And put that together. But that was a very educational process in public speaking. Even though I've been pitching for a long time, like I don't have jitters about getting up in front of people, but you got to be completely off book, right? Or they want you to be totally off book. And it was 12 minutes is what the time they want you to hit, or they want to be hit in any case. And so, I went down to, I'd written it, and you go over it with them a couple times, right? They're reading it and they've got thoughts and what have you, but not in a getting studio notes kind of way, just in a, these are people that do these speeches, work with people doing speeches all the time. So they're like, well, it might flow a little better if you moved like this section over to here or whatever, stuff like that. But in any case, so I went to, flew down to Bogota, they put me up, and I sat in my hotel room for 3 days rehearsing in front of my mirror. I was petrified that I was going to get up in front of this giant audience of people and fudge something, but was totally off book, You know, by the time, and then the day before, you've got to everybody in a dress rehearsal basically, and you go and everybody gets up, does their speech, and then they'd figure out the order based on kind of like there's gonna be a headliner, and that was not me, but there's gonna be a headliner who does who's got the main speech, and then the people that come below, but kind of based on how well you perform and like how engaged, you know, they were, whatever, like they decide, you know, where you're going to go. And I was the slot right before like the Secretary of Defense or something. But it was a great experience, and lovely people.
Oh, that's such a great thing to say that you've done, you know, and then to have it be on imagination. I could see that just really highlighting your work, and kind of a creative thing to do.
Yeah, you can go. I think it's on YouTube. I'm pretty sure.
Oh, great. We'll be sure to probably
I guess Henry
post
Jones
it.
TED Talk. You'll find it. So I see Jay
Yeah,
has a question
Jay.
here. As an older writer trying to break in, what's the best way to leverage career-long skill sets that are not industry specific? Jay, give me a little more meat on that bone, my friend. What kind of skill sets are we talking about here? If you're a professional assassin, you know, that's going to be pretty awesome, man. You'll be able to get in and work off that. What do we got here? 20 years as a Wall Street software engineer. Okay, well, that's gives you an incredible amount of insight, you know, into that world and the people that inhabit it. Since you were one of the people that inhabited it, I would say if I were you, I mean, write something in that realm. Right. And that's the headline on the thing. Like I spent 20 plus years as a Wall Street software engineer. You know, I was inside the belly of the beast. And, you know, craft something around that. That's how you do it. Like I've got a friend who was a Navy SEAL, was a Teams guy, and he wrote a pilot, you know, in that world, but kind of on the retirement side of it. And you know, a classic tale, you know, that, you know, they get drawn back into a situation, but they're no longer, you know, military operatives, so it's, you know, turns into kind of a vigilante situation. But now normally, like if somebody just comes to you with that, you're just like, whatever. But because the guy was a SEAL, right, and now it has a completely different perspective, like now it has value. So that hopefully that helps you out there. Jay, Bridget Bell McMahon, thanks for doing this. Can you talk a little about writing features in the era where episodic seems to be king? So in the last, I've had more feature gigs in the last couple of years than TV ones by a long shot. It kind of surprised me as well. But I think one of the things that's happened is because, and a lot of the indie film money has come back around. And by the like indie, like Lionsgate is considered independent, right? So it's like there's the major studios and streamers, and then there's everybody else. But all these streamers were paying these like obscene amounts of money to these big showrunners to, you know, come and do a 3-year deal for $100 million, right? And then the pandemic hits, and you're not getting work product from these people that you're paying this obscene money to, because they can't shoot, right? There's nothing, you know, coming out of the gates. So once that kind of opened up, all anybody wanted to do was service their deals, and like get their money's worth out of these things. So what that means is they're not buying as much anymore, right? There's not as many new shows. Like, although it certainly seems like there's plenty of new shows, there's a lot of stuff that was already in the pipeline. But features are starting to come back around, and what they've seen is, and they've been saying this for 20 years, that, like, you know, they said it when VHS came out, that it was going to kill the film business, and, you know, no, it didn't. You know, because there's a difference between sitting and watching something at home and going and sitting and watching something at the theater. and getting out of the house and being around other people, and it's a different experience, like watching Top Gun, on your flat screen at home is not the same as watching it with an audience full of people. It's just not. But you got to do both. And I'll see if I can get you some kind of real answer to this, Bridget, but you got to be able to do both. You have to be able to write features and television, and you need to have samples that are excellent in both spaces. Because when an opportunity comes up, right, whatever, you run into some huge showrunner who's benevolent enough to ask for a sample, and you've got no TV stuff, dang. Right. And there are some showrunners that will read a feature sample for a spot in a room, but not a lot. Like they want to see a TV sample. Like that's kind of like they feel like you haven't done the minimum amount, like the cost of entry is just, write a spec pilot. But features are coming back. There's a lot fewer feature jobs. Like to frame this, pre-2009 writer's strike, there were about 350 open feature writer assignments in a year, right, between all buyers. Steps were typically 4 or 5 step deals, so that's a treatment, a draft, 2 rewrites, and a polish. That's 5 steps. But after the writer's strike, it went to about 75 open feature assignments a year, and it's never recovered. It's about that number. Maybe it's a squanch higher here or there, and went to 1 or 2 step deals, where they want all the work for less money. And depending where you are in your career, you can kind of stick to your guns and say, well, dude, if you want a treatment, you got to pay for it, and it's a significant sum. But the thing I always come back to is it doesn't matter, like if you're writing feature or TV, it's just got to be good. It's got to be really good. And for people trying to get in, I'm sure you're reading scripts online and stuff that are available. And like that was really hard, by the way, back in the day, like just finding any scripts to read. There's Drew's Scriptorama. It was like the only thing online where you could find anything. Otherwise, sometimes they would like print them. Like I remember they had the Shawshank, like you could get at Barnes and Noble or whatever. But like the I don't know, that power of having, just exquisite material. You're reading scripts and you're like, man, I can do better than this. And you probably can, right? There's a lot of people who do this for a living that aren't good at it, like every job, right? But the fact of the matter is you don't have to be as good as the people doing it to get in. You have to be better than the people doing it to get in, because otherwise they're just going to hire the person they know, like anything, right? If you feel like if you feel like it's apples to apples, you're going to buy it from the Apple merchant that you always buy your apples from. But the feature business is coming back, and movies that are good movies have just been cleaning up. And movies that are bad movies, not doing so great. You used to find scripts laying on the sidewalk. Geez, Jim, I mean, here you're talking about not having enough access.
Nice. Let's see. Last from Bridget, and then we got to wrap up. Any chance you'll be at the BAFF Awards?
I will not. I am on assignment right now. So I am diligently sitting here in my lovely little office, typing the day away every day. But best of luck to everybody who's up for awards, and leverage those awards as much as you can.
Oh, so great. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us today, Henry. Really appreciate our conversation. Yeah, and thank you to our audience.
Hey, thank you guys for all the questions. I hope I was helpful.
Oh, this was fantastic. Well, we'll see you next time.
Right on. All right, you guys have a good day. Oh, wait, hold on. We got one more.
Is there one more?
Oh, they're just thank yous. Oh, you guys are the best.
That's so nice, you guys.
Well, by the way, Jim, that's a movie right there, man. you're finding scripts on the sidewalk every day, and you don't know like who left the scripts. Were they good scripts? Did you read them? Now the mystery. We're not leaving yet, Jim. I got to know. Were they good? Did you read any of them? Oh, did Jim already leave?
Oh, maybe. Yeah. To be continued.
To be
Lost.
wait.
Michael Clayton.
Oh, Michael Clayton. Okay. So that just lost. That Michael Clayton script's a good script though. Tony knows what he's doing. But man, I feel like you got a story there, guy, you start finding guys starts finding these scripts, lying on the ground, where's that go? Are they good? Does he steal one and take it as his own, and sell it, and the person comes back to him? I don't know. But like, that's like, you got a great place to start. Well, all right, guys, thank you. And I even got a little awesome mystery solved by Jim Worst. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah.
All right, I'll talk to you guys
Fantastic.
later.
See you guys.
All right, bye-bye.